This is the Mettle podcast, and I am your host, Coach Thomann. I'm a former athlete, teacher, coach, and athletic director that switched careers after surviving cancer and a stroke in the fall of 2020. But I'm also a dad of a son and a daughter that were successful high school athletes that went on to college. Now I use that experience along with my ICF coaching certification when helping teams, coaches, and athletes from all over the country. Each week, I will pose a specific question that will help coaches of all types better understand mental toughness. In the Mettle podcast, coaches will learn to help their athletes overcome adversity without being the adversity they need to overcome. Hey, welcome to the Mettle podcast. I'm going to introduce my guest here today. Honestly, well, you know I'm not joking if you listen to this show because I don't ever say this with people, but this is one of my favorite people. I know. And so, but what's really cool about this and my guest Megan Gilmore is I talk a lot about transformation in my journey and stuff like that, and I don't know. How do I put this? 5 years ago, if we'd have ran into each other, I don't know if you would have been one of my favorite people.
You know what I mean? Same.
Right there you go. Right. So I think that's, I think that, and that is not because I'm not to say that you haven't changed, but I think it's mostly because you would not have enjoyed me. And because of the way I was
person too, you know, so
that's fair.
Yeah.
So well, and to be fair, over the last, how long have I known you? It's getting on 3 years now. In all that time, I'm not sure you were always one of my favorite people.
That's also fair.
That's fair. But anyway, so my guest today, Megan Gilmore, owner, creator of Lark a coaching company. I'll let you talk about that a little bit. And I'm also have you on here because you're an author of a children's book that I think is applicable to much more than children. And,
yeah, thanks.
And that's what I want to get. So tell us a little bit about all things Megan Gilmore.
Okay. So, I think it's helpful especially when you're going to talk about the kind of stuff we're going to talk about, for people to know like why they should trust us maybe, or even, even like what parts of my story, if we were to pick them up off the timeline, might connect in a way that feels meaningful. So a couple things about me are that I got my undergraduate degree in psychology and leadership studies, and then my master's degree in addictions counseling. And while I was a graduate assistant doing research on student retention and persistence and coaching and that kind of thing, I got introduced to the field of professional coaching. And it captured me from the get-go, even though I didn't really know what I was doing or how to do it well. But I'm really committed to like credibility and integrity, and so at least I try to be. And so I right away was like, we got to get this certification thing down. So I was a licensed clinical addictions counselor that then went on and got my international coach training and certification, both nationally and internationally. And then I've taught at the university level leadership courses as well as developmental psychology courses. Then I decided to start a professional, like my own private practice in coaching. It went really well.
And I don't want to interject here because you have to remember, like you and I know this story and some of these pitfalls with coaching and stuff, but a lot of my listeners don't. Mm-hmm. Like when you talk about the certification and the credentialing for coaching, like anybody listening here could start a coaching business tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah. Right. It's I don't want to say it's the wild, wild west at this point with
That's
with
exactly
coaching.
How I describe it sometimes, though. It does feel
right.
Like yeah.
So when you talk about credentialing and the need for it, it's you have to build your own credibility because it's not a state licensed or a national licensed entity that
Right.
does that.
Right. So, well, and I kind of am like, yeah, you do. And there's also structures out there that are what make a coach credible in this day and age. So I was I was just looking at something on social media today, and I won't say who posted it, but it was somebody that like is pretty popular outside of the professional coaching industry in business coaching. So not certified through the International Coach Federation or Center for Credential. They're not a board certified coach or anything. And they said the biggest thing that holds business coaches up is this feeling that they're not credible. Join me for a workshop and we'll talk about 5 ways to make yourselves credible. And I'm like, I hope way number 1 is go through an accredited training program
Right.
and abide by a code of ethics, that kind of thing. But yeah, there's lots of people,
It's like,
that are operating
hey, the
outside the
one,
law in the Wild West.
right. It's like, what's the one thing, what holds up surgeons? Well, they're not trained. Okay. Join with me and we'll practice on this mannequin here. And it's like, no,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So after I went for a couple years doing my own private practice, which I absolutely loved and was pretty successful, I just knew I couldn't work on my own for myself for much longer. I wanted to be connected with other people and professional community. And so I started Lark, which is an educational nonprofit, and we focus on well-being education, which is really grounded in the research and practice of positive psychology. And then professional coach training through our Lark certified coach training program and the professional development of our coaches after that as well. And then what we call culture care. So really looking at how can we take what we know about psychology, sociology, justice, lots of different things, and start transforming at the level of the system or the group rather than just the individual. So that's a little bit about what I do and my background. I've got a couple kids.
And yeah, and we could go into all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And that's so when we talk about well-being, I think that's a myth. It's not it's an overused, not well understood term.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So when we're talking about, because that is at its core, that's what your coaching business is around, is
Right.
building well-being in an individual, in a group, something like that. What are we talking about when we talk about well-being?
Yeah, that's a good question, I think, because it gets used interchangeably with wellness, and they're not the same thing. So if you think about, I'll say first what it's not like. It's not wellness. So wellness is often measured by like certain, I love these new things with the Mac.
You must be on your iPhone, right?
I'm on my Mac, and you can do this or the balloons, which.
Oh, no. Yeah, right. And you know what else happens? If you do 2 thumbs up, you get more.
Do you really?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But then also, oh, I know this is so off topic. So I want now. Unfortunately, show me 2 thumbs down. That's
no. What?
Yeah, it's not good.
Oh my gosh.
Right? They really like.
Teach me about this.
I'm trying to like.
I had both hands. Does that do anything?
I don't know. I need. I found this all out just on.
Right. I haven't even looked it up.
Right?
I've just
You can do one thumbs down and then you just get the thumbs down. But the 2 of them get the rainy day.
I really like the fireworks situation.
Oh, right.
That's life changing.
I know. And I'm already thinking, oh, I need to edit this out. And I'm like, no, I'm not editing this out. This is fantastic.
Okay, so back
to it.
Wellness, we were talking about the distinction between well-being and wellness. What is well-being? Well, it's not wellness, even though wellness can be a part of it for some people, because wellness is often measured by like this idea of fitness and size, and for better or worse, like you want to become a certain size, whether it's your muscle, you want your heart to be stronger, you want your lung capacity to increase, you want whatever, you want to be able to climb up a mountain faster, that sort of thing. So wellness is often really focused on like your physical or emotional wellness,
Right.
which is then measured by have we reached wellness or not yet, right? And illness then is on this side. So we want to not be ill, we want to be well, and so we practice and exercise and eat well and that sort of thing to get to wellness. Well-being is more about bringing together all of the different parts of you that are fragmented into a place of wholeness. And it's a practice, like it's a continual practice of being well rather than saying, oh, I've reached wellness now and I've just got to maintain that. Like you assess, where am I on these 7 facets of well being? Those being positive emotion, engagement, or what some people call flow, good relationships, meaning or like finding purpose and resonance in life, achievement, and then mindfulness and embodiment. So we assess what are those, where are you in those 7 different facets? You might be doing really well and be really satisfied in a few, and then others you're like, man, no, that is not great. It's not great. And so we focus practice and building habits around that so that as a whole person, physically, spiritually, and no matter what kind of person you are, like no matter the ability in your body versus the disability in your body, no matter what you have access to, like gym membership or nutritionist or dietitian, like
Right.
that, with well-being, any human being can work on developing that. So that's the distinction.
And I think that distinction really allows me to tie this conversation together
Mm.
into athletics,
Mhm.
because you can have some of the most well people in the world that
Right.
are
Like physically
very
fit. Yeah.
physically fit, like you said, just pillars of wellness
Yeah,
as
for
far
sure.
as physical wellness,
Mhm.
but don't appreciate or work on their well-being,
Right. Yeah.
which
Or
I
they
think
might
if I
even
was,
see it as like an inconvenience to do so,
oh, absolutely,
or
100%.
softer
Yeah.
or woo-woo somehow or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's, if I was going to get into like most of my clientele working with athletics, I'm talking about people that are pretty good in their wellness,
Yeah.
physical wellness.
They have
What
to
I'm
be to
working on,
compete. Yeah.
they have to be, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm working on is helping them with that well-being,
Yeah.
because I mean, you do have to be fit. You have to, you don't want to be ill. You want to be
Yeah.
well.
What's
Um,
wild is though, when people like, and there's research behind this, right? That when people work on educating themselves and doing these well-being practices, they increase their academic success and then they increase like the success of the other goals that they're working toward too. So it's not like you have to abandon your athletic performance to give some of yourself to, well, like it's not like you're stealing from your athletic performance or stamina to give something to your well-being. It's actually, if you give something to your well-being, you perform much better. Like,
oh,
yeah.
because as you said, wellness ends up being very much results driven,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is my heart rate where I need it? Have I climbed this mountain? Can I bench this? Can I
Right.
win this many games?
Right.
Things like
Yeah.
that.
Am I
And
lifting right? Like, am I, yeah,
right. And you have to have some goals like that.
for
And
sure.
athletics is set up like that by definition. But you have to, it doesn't always create the most well-rounded human being.
Right. Yeah. And then when your identity gets completely tied up in your performance
There you
and
go.
who you are as an athlete, what happens when you get injured? And what happens when someone else starts? And what happens when you have to change teams? And what happens, like, what happens when things don't go exactly how you planned that they would? And it's not just like, oh, that's another challenge you need to overcome. If your identity is tied to who you are as an athlete and your performance, then it's devastating. Like it,
And you're talking about, you're saying it as if it's an if thing, and it's not an if thing. It's a
yeah.
win thing, because
Yeah.
it
Right.
is going to happen
For sure.
at some point for
Yep.
every athlete.
Right.
So talk to me, give me a little bit of, I know you were an athlete when you were
Yeah.
younger. What's your
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, so I was a competitive gymnast, swimmer, and diver. I played other sports, but I learned pretty quickly by the time I was in about fifth or sixth grade that any sport that involved a ball, like softball, basketball, I enjoyed tennis a little bit, not competitively. Um, I loved playing a pickup game just to connect with people, but that's not where I would compete. So competitive gymnast, competitive swimmer, competitive diver through high school. And then I kept up my practice a little bit into college, but the college I chose to go to didn't have teams in my sports. So that's where the competition piece of it kind of fell away. But yeah, uh, placed in state, that kind of thing. Was the anchor for my relay team. So it was a big deal.
So, yeah. So when we're talking about the credibility here, the reason I
Right.
wanted you to say that is you started in on your credibility with, the psychology and all
Right.
that, but
Exactly.
I want to make sure and build the credibility that you are an athlete as well. So you understand,
Yeah.
and
A good
chances
one.
are, yeah, and a good one. Yeah, exactly. Because it matters. There you go.
Right.
There's the, yeah, there's the Megan I know, right?
Right.
Like you got to put that out, right? No, I got,
Yeah.
but that's my point, right?
You know what I mean,
So
though? Like,
you,
I cared.
you
It was important to me.
yes,
It was like a huge part of my life and identity. I'm still incredibly grateful for it. The fact that neither of my kids absolutely love sports is devastating to me because I
I,
think I'd probably be the best sports mom on the planet. But yeah,
I wish I had the opportunity to see you as a sports mom, because all these things that you
yeah,
preach and want to
yep,
say,
yep.
there is nothing that tests it more than being a
Oh yeah.
sports parent.
So
Nothing.
my daughter is just starting competitive gymnastics. She's 11. And
Okay.
I'm like on this razor's edge of
Mm-hmm.
it's got to be your choice, like how you feeling about it? Step up to like you better
Let's,
get into
yeah.
practice. Now, I don't care if you're tired, like your team's got. Yeah. I'm walking a metaphorical balance beam around it right now, but
No,
yeah.
there you go. Well, and it is a struggle though. No amount of athletic talent or physical ability can overcome a poor mindset. Anxiety, fear, and negativity will always diminish an athlete's abilities and limit their success. If you're not intentionally developing your child's mental toughness, then they are not reaching their full potential. Mental coaching provides the individual drills needed to build the positive mindset necessary for success on the court and in life. Contact today to schedule a free coaching session and start building mental toughness in your athlete. Said the more you care about something is the more likely it's going to trigger some responses, which is kind of
Oh, for
what I
sure.
wanted you, which is what I wanted you to have, to talk about today, because I've
Yeah.
got your book right here.
Oh, yay.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Here, I've
Amy
got mine.
Dalla.
Here she
You
is.
got yours. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is yours signed by the author?
No, no, it's
Oh,
not.
see, mine is. I know. No. So I don't know. You don't have to tell us the entire book, but tell me. Well, one, you should go get it. It's not just a kid's book. I think you should just go get it and read it, but it's good for kids as well. But tell me a little bit about the book and the whole point behind it.
Yeah, so the whole point behind it is to introduce kids or whoever reads it to a simple understanding of your different brain structures and how they work, and really highlighting the amygdala and how it connects to a few other basic brain structures. Um, and and the idea is that the answer in the end, Amy is the amygdala, and she has these different friends.
Spoiler, you're going to spoiler it.
Yeah, well, is that the point? What do you want me to say about it?
No, you're good. I'm just
Oh,
messing
okay.
with you. Keep going. Yeah.
So the whole point is that she's very alert to emotion and when threats and challenges come up and doesn't know what to do when that happens. And so we introduce Amy to breath and breath to Amy, and that becomes the answer for moving forward and like centering yourself, valuing yourself, and deciding what to do next. So, yeah, that's a little bit of summary.
And with that, the importance of breath work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, awareness and breath work, not necessarily just like, oh, breathing is good, but really for me, like, what's the use? Like, what's the utility behind breath work? And for me, the utility is like what comes after it, right? And so having the awareness to know this is what I need to engage my breath in my body and with my brain around what's happening. And what that will help me do next. And what it helps us do next is gain awareness about what's happening to us and agency, or like this ability to choose what comes next. And I think like when you're thinking about athletes, yeah, the best, right? The best are the people that are incredibly disciplined. They know the ins and outs of their sports. They know how their body works with it. They know their team. But because they've got that really strong foundation, and this is how it works with music or anything else, right? Because they have that really strong disciplined foundation, then they can start to become creative. Like, then they can add to it like their own flair or a new way of doing it that like busts a record out of the water that nobody else thought about before, and that's what breathwork gives me. It gives me a way to connect into the like, here I am in this moment. What do I need and what's needed from me, and without it, that's not what we'd be thinking about.
May have gone on a tangent here where I maybe have lost some people. So
Oh yeah,
what are we like when we start talking about breath work? Let's back up a little bit, right?
sure,
So
yeah.
what do we mean by, well, let's start by this. When, in what sort of situation should an athlete or a parent of an athlete realize that they should try engaging in some breath work? What are the things, the triggers that go, okay, this is, I need to do something, right?
Yeah, yeah. So my first response would be, when if you experience pressure, like the internal sensation of like pressure, whether it's emotional or physical, that leads to a feeling of overwhelm, right? Or another way of thinking about it, when people romanticize overwhelm, is if you are hyper fixated on something and can't focus on anything else, to the detriment of yourself or another person, like, then you should probably engage in some breath work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you say romanticize, as in
Yeah.
it's like
It's like a badge of honor,
like yeah, that's a good way to put it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh well, I get really
Overwhelm
worked
or
up.
exhaustion. Yeah.
I get really worked up on it because I really care about it. I'm like, oh,
Right.
okay, great.
Yeah.
However, it's not overly helpful. It's not overly
Right.
healthy, and it's
Right.
not what's best for us long term.
Right.
So, well, let's just go down the list. So, those are some ways that like you should feel those sensations, and whenever you're feeling overwhelmed.
Right.
I know that you like the term flooded, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is, that has a tech, like I say a term, but it's an actual, like, there's a little
Technical.
scientific
Right.
explanation to it, right? What is,
Right.
so when somebody's flooded, what is that? That's,
Yeah. So when you get flooded, it's actually your the blood flow from what's called your prefrontal cortex. So this the front part of your brain that is like our command center, if you will. It's like the part of us that's thinking and it knows that we're thinking, right? So it's able
mm-hmm.
to focus, make decisions, think creatively about solutions, that sort of thing. When you're flooded, which usually happens in times of like high pressure, exhaustion, overwhelm, or conflict, um, your heart rate then goes above 100 beats per minute, which is already happening in a lot of competitive athletes, by the way.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
your heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute. Blood flow drastically reduces from your prefrontal cortex and starts going into your midbrain, the area where that some people would more call like your lizard brain or the instinctual, emotional part of you, and also to all your extremities. Like blood's going to start flowing to all your extremities and it triggers this like neurochemical and hormonal response as well. You're pumping up adrenaline, you're pumping up cortisol, you're pumping up norepinephrine. And the whole idea is to make yourself as strong and fast and big as possible in those moments.
Flight or fight,
Because
right?
exactly, it's fight, flight, freeze.
Yep.
And so yeah, that's great if you've got to run away from a bear in the woods, um, but
But if there's
not
no
super
bear,
great. Right,
yeah,
exactly. Not super
yeah,
great if there's no bear, or if you're like just in a team huddle, or if you're, if you're trying to work methodically on something else, like, or focus on something or be creative around something or build relationship. Like it's not a great place to lead from, not lead others from, but like let
right.
yourself be led by. Yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of research out there now that's not like, not only is it not helpful in the short term, there's a lot of
Right.
long term, especially for
Damage.
children, a
Yeah.
lot long term trauma damage from feeling like that all
All the
the
time.
time.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
which
we're supposed to be basically, um, I love, I get really nerded out about this stuff. So I'm not going to go down all the rabbit trails, but I might say, hey, here's something to Google if you also like to nerd out
right,
about stuff. But if you are interested, you can Google autonomic tone. So our autonomic nervous system versus is broken up into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. These are the things that we don't control voluntarily. So there's part of us that like just breathes and digests and makes our heart beat well and
right.
moves our muscles even though we're not thinking about moving our muscles, like that kind of thing. That's our parasympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is the one that gets activated and is leading when we're in fight or flight, when we're flooded, right? Ideally, a human body should be experiencing activation or like the parasympathetic nervous system leading us, that rest or digest kind of like peaceful healing mode, should be experiencing that 80% of the time. And we should really only be activated and led by our sympathetic nervous system about 20% of the time. But if you go around and talk to any child
Right.
or any adult or any coach or any athlete and say about how like percentage of your time would you say you feel stressed or overwhelmed, they're going to say more than 20%. Like,
Oh yeah,
right? So we've got a huge problem in that if we stay in our activated by and led by our sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight place, threat response place, stress response place, more than 20% of the time, that's when it starts having these detrimental effects on our genes, on inflammation in our body. Over 90% of like fatal disease is due to some kind of inflammation turning into some kind of disease. And it's a lot of us, sitting around
yeah.
while fight or flight's happening in us, but it doesn't get a chance to be metabolized or used, and so then it just turns into disease. Yeah.
And let me reiterate all of what you just said there. Like,
Okay.
if you continually live in a state of, not continually, but if you are more than 20%, right? And
Right. Like, and for
you
some
are
people, they don't
in,
feel normal if they're not in
right,
that state. Yeah.
right. But if you're in there all the time and you're feeling
Mm.
that flight or fight, or you're feeling that flooded emotion a lot,
Yeah.
we are talking about, has the potential of shortening your life,
Like, legitimately. Yeah.
legitimately
Hmm.
shortening it, and possibly into the children, your own children. Like
100%.
you're passing those genes, and this is where I geek out because of the biology. But it shortened
Right.
it shortens the telomeres, and it's like generational
For
stress you're creating.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then so for people that aren't biologists, the telomeres, do you want to explain what those are?
You can't make chicken salad out of chicken feathers, or perhaps you've heard it or even said the other version. Regardless, good coaches should not blame a lack of success on the players they get to coach. It's a lame excuse, and I'm sorry if that ruffles your feathers. But it's your job as a coach to develop your players. If your athletes lack skill or mental toughness, it's your responsibility to develop it. But how do you make today's athlete tougher without risking breaking them? Well, Mental Metal Coaching now offers professional development for coaches, explaining how to do just that. The program is called Ember to Inferno, Building Mentally Tough Athletes. It teaches real tools and tangible methods that are proven to increase the mental health and toughness of athletes. The program is available as an in-person seminar or as virtual small group coaching. Don't wish for mentally tough athletes. Build them. Contact Mental Metal Coaching today. Mettle is a person's ability to face adversity in a spirited and resilient manner. It is a great skill to have for athletics and for life, but it is not something we are born with. If you want it, you have to forge your mettle. And if you listen to the Mental Metal podcast, you already know that, but not everybody else does yet. So help me out by ordering and wearing some sweet The Mental Metal podcast gear. We've got short sleeve tees, long sleeve tees, and some super comfortable hoodies. Order online today and you can have your gear in no time. But the best part is that every order helps support the show and helps me spread the message that mental toughness is a trait that can and should be built. So find the link in the show notes, order your gear, and start showing that you know how to forge your mettle. Yeah.
For people
All
that
right.
aren't biology teachers, do you want to explain what telomeres are?
Well, it's the way in which telomeres are necessary in order for cells to divide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So and that's the mitosis to go. So if you want to heal, and we
Right.
always need to heal because cells are always dying. If you want to heal, you need your mitosis to be ramping up. And aging is the slowing down of mitosis. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So if you are shortening your telomeres, you aren't as good at mitosis, which means you're aging yourself, which means you're going to have more inflammation, more susceptible to disease, all of these
And
things.
you
And
can
then,
be born with shorter or longer telomeres, right?
yes,
Like than other people are
yeah,
born with. Yeah.
absolutely. So, yeah, and that's because if you procreate with short telomeres, then the baby's starting with shorter telomeres.
Right.
It's,
And what I think is
I'm,
wild is like you would think that, okay, I'm born with cells with like this long of this is highly, magnified, but like
this is,
I'm born with cells with this long, however long telomeres. And
yeah.
just as I age, those shorten and shorten and shorten and shorten and shorten until I die. And that's kind of what happens in people. But then also
Mhm.
you can lengthen them. Like there are changes
Yes.
that you can make to lengthen your telomeres, which is like basically getting down to the smallest building blocks, right? These building blocks of your cells that create you as a multicellular organism. And you're kind of hacking your cells with the and saying like, we're going to care for ourselves in this way. And then the response of your cells is to lengthen, like the telomeres is to lengthen.
Working on this emotional well-being, working with a coach,
Mm-hmm.
therapy, those things, it's not all the woo-woo stuff. And that's what I love about it,
Right.
because it's not like you can just get into the woo-woo stuff
Right.
and think it's all nonsense. But for me, a very rational, logical guy that has a biology degree, when you take the woo-woo and
Mm-hmm.
turn it all the way down to some of the smallest parts, not even a cell, what's inside a cell.
Yeah.
And you can show that the woo-woo's gone to me, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's gone. It's so this sort of stuff is when we say it's life-changing, it's not it's not a stretch. It's not
No,
hyperbole.
and
It's the
right.
truth.
Yeah. And isn't it wild too that it doesn't just change your life positively? Like it then starts impacting the people around you in ways that I would have never been able to like predict or imagine. And that's another reason though why I think it's so important. Like if you're going to work with a coach or a therapist, or that you work with someone credible, like work with someone that has a good research base, ask them about the practices that they're encouraging you to engage in, that sort of thing. Um, because it's not that I mean, you could get positive results from a lot of people, but something that I
Absolutely.
hear a lot, and I'm sure something you hear a lot, Matt, is like people that work with us because of the research base and like well, you know, but make transformational progress so efficiently and so quickly that it's shocking. Like it's shocking to them. They'll have lived an entire way for their whole lives. And then within 6 to 12 months, be like, what? You know,
Yeah.
this is incredible. Yeah.
Yes. And so it's funny when yeah, it's and what the issue is as amazing as amazing as that is, that hey, in 6 to 12 months, I think there's still people that are like, oh, it's going to take 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have that kind of time. Well, so
Really?
like it is, it's you know what I mean? It's life
Yeah.
changing,
Yeah.
and in the grand scheme of things, it's good. But I think it still takes work. It's like
Absolutely.
me telling you, you need to breathe and how this will shorten your telomeres and talking to you 1 hour every other week is not like, you have to practice these things.
Exactly. And that's actually when you asked, you know, how can someone know that they need to work on breath work? It's why I kind of paused because you just need to work on it, whether you think you do or not. And as you work on it, you'll realize why you needed to. Because
Yeah.
right now, if you're sitting most of the time with short, shallow breath in a fight or flight response, or like constantly having to recover from a stress response, that's what your body has habituated to. Like, that's what you know as normal. And so it's not going to be until you're you know, at an 11 out of 10 that you realize you really need something, right? And in that moment, you're going to be flooded. So you won't have access to your prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
You won't know what to choose in that moment, right? Unless you've developed the practice and habit ahead of time. And if you've developed the practice and habit ahead of time, the habit lives somewhere else in your brain. It doesn't live in your prefrontal cortex. So if you've got the habit of breath work, when you're in that moment that's overwhelming or too muchness, you know, then your body knows what to do. Like you know, you know to engage in breath work. You know how to come down from like a flooded state takes 20 minutes for you to metabolize
Right.
and re-regulate without doing anything else. But if you can practice breath work and some other thing, there's other things too, then you can shorten that significantly and be back to, you know, centered, normal, got
Yeah.
got
I
your juices
so
flowing.
this metaphor, this analogy is going to be, it's a terrible one, but it's going to make sense. So like
Oh,
anytime I know somebody that like buys a pistol for home defense, right?
oh,
And they're
sure.
like, "Oh, I'm going to have it in the nightstand and it's
Right.
fantastic." And I'm like, "Well, how often do you go practice it?" And they're
Yeah,
like, "Oh, I don't. It's just right there. Oh, this is going to go well. This is going to go
right,
really well.
exactly.
The
Like,
first time
"Do you know how it
somebody
works? Have you cleaned
do
it
you,
ever?"
do you, like, have you ever practiced? Like, can you hit
Right,
anything?
right.
Like, because
I get
it's
it.
that's where the breath work comes in. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, I'll just breathe when I need it. Man, it's the wrong time, right?
right.
Because you are not practiced
Mhm.
you're not practiced and you're seasoned enough in your breathing to be able to use it. You need to breathe. You need to learn to breathe when everything's fine, and then you can get better
Exactly.
at it.
Yeah, so what I
So,
suggest people do is set alarms or what I call cues,
mm,
right? To build that habit. So a lot of people use alarms on their phone. And I'll say, set an alarm for 2 to 3 minutes. There's tons of breathwork apps. There's you can use those. You can don't need to, whatever. But set an alarm for 2 times a day, or use a cue, which is just like a reminder, right? Cues you to, oh, I need to breathe now, with something else that you do nearly every day. So, for
mhm.
example, do you drive over the same bridge taking your kids to school every day or going to work every day? Okay, at that bridge, also breathe, you know, for 2 minutes. Just deep inhales and exhales. There's lots of other breath work that you can do that can like get really fancy and reduce pain and reduce emotional distress and things like that. But if you just focus on deep, full breaths that go all the way down in your belly and letting them all the way out for 2 minutes after you cross a bridge every day, you will notice within a week, you'll start noticing when, like, not when you're flooded, but the precursor to that. You'll start noticing, like, when your breath starts getting a little bit more shallow before your heart rate goes all the way up, like, "Oh, what's happening to me?" Right? And, be able to reengage that breath. So maybe it's, like, right before you brush your teeth, or it's when you get in your car, or it's when you're making breakfast, but something that you do nearly every day, just kind of on autopilot, stack a well-being practice on top of that. And if you can do that, that just creates the habit and makes it so much easier.
So this was even you're gonna be impressed with this. This was before I even became a coach. I needed to I knew I needed to start breathing and doing some meditation, right? Because I had
Mhm.
a tough time. I went and got some Red Hots, just good
Oh,
old Red Hots.
yeah?
And most people have a daily pill thing, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
and I put a red hot in the morning and a red hot in the evening with whatever. And when I take that pill, I had to breathe for 2 minutes.
I
And
love
then
that.
right, and it became like, rather than, not that there's anything wrong with it or not, but instead of like an anxiety medication or
Right.
whatever, it was this, because it's doing the same thing,
It
right?
was your
It's
own medicine. Yeah, you were giving yourself your own
yes.
medicine. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's, look, I know, I'm quite certain we've lost people whenever we say, "Hey, if you could just breathe for 2 minutes a day, you'll live longer and be
Yeah,
right."
yeah.
Because
Well,
it's a huge leap, right?
yeah, but I also think the reason that we lose people there is because whether or not we like to admit it, there's something threatening about that. And, like, us saying stop or pause and breathe for 2 minutes a day means not just, like, attending to the positive benefits that are gonna come from that. It also means that for 2 minutes, you're gonna be aware of what's going on in your life right now, right? And what's happening in your body right now. And depending on people's experiences, their choices, their circumstances in life, like, reconnecting to your body and your brain in that way doesn't always feel liberating at first. Sometimes it feels threatening first. It feels hard first.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is more why people check out, not because they're not interested or because, like, this couldn't be helpful or beneficial, but because, like, there is something embodied, not necessarily conscious right away, but embodied that's like, I don't think so. Like, that means I'm gonna have to change some stuff about who I am, and I know that might sound like an exaggeration, but I've just seen it over and over and over again,
Oh,
that if
and
you
and
attend
you,
in that way, it brings crap up, and you might
yeah,
have worked really, really hard to bury that crap down.
right. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, um, absolutely. I think that one of my best examples I give with the athletes, if you pay, like, you take up, rest in peace, Kobe Bryant, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the absolute nastiest competitors ever to walk the face of earth. Like, I mean an athlete that was always in your face, always competing. And he did meditation and breath work every morning.
Yeah.
And you have to think about it that way. Like, by being able to control his breath and knowing how to control his breath
Yeah.
in times of high stress that he put himself in every day, he was better able to control his emotions, his thought process, and everything you need in a high pressure situation.
Right. And be innovative in those high pressure situations. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
They was able.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
and you think about somebody like a fighter pilot. I do
Mm-hmm.
not want America's fighter pilots defending the nation to be in a flight or fight response all the time.
Right. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not, they're not making good decisions.
Right. Well,
Right?
and I wonder if I don't know if this connects to one of your current like hobby/passions, but this works in like martial arts and self-defense too. But it's just more accepted. Like when we get into a basically what you're doing when you're practicing self-defense or martial arts, or you're slowing your response time in a fight or flight situation. And what happens then as you slow your response time is that you have a pause between a stimulus and your reaction or your response. And in that pause is your ability to choose, right? So
Right.
it's so elevates like and honors our humanity to be able to give yourself that pause to express agency around like how you want to move skillfully into what's next, right? Or
Right.
even if you're not skillful yet, like you want to move into what's next. But really, all of these different modalities of whether it's becoming exceptional physically or in self-defense, it's this breath work or other what we would call like vagal toning
Right.
practices. It's all doing that. It's all slowing our response time to that initial threat trigger so that we have space to choose. And that is what I'm really like all about for people.
So, to put it in other terms for athletes and coaches that understand it, we all know,
Right.
and we talk about an athlete that does really well or a coach that coaches, when we see it, we see a player that they say, what they say is the game slows down for them. Right.
Right.
So they see
Yeah.
that, right. And when we see an athlete, or athletes will talk about that, or like, hey man, the game has just slowed down for me. I see things. They appear to see things before they're actually happening, because
Right.
they right, and things like that.
Yeah.
And most of that comes from experience, right?
Mhm.
But part of that is getting away from that parasympathetic response
Exactly.
and you're actually able to process things on time
Right.
rather
Right.
than worrying about if, and we say life or death, but because that's not what it is, but your brain doesn't necessarily know the
It
difference.
doesn't know that. Yeah.
Right,
Exactly.
exactly. Right? It
Yeah.
doesn't know the difference. Parents of athletes know that confidence and belief are fundamental for success. We want them to play without fear and without anxiety, but once those negative thoughts take over, it can derail years of work. Turning that anxiety into belief is similar to building strength and speed. It just takes intentional effort over time. Mental Mettle coaching provides the individual drills needed to build the positive mindset necessary for success on the court and in life. Contact today to schedule a free coaching session and start building mental toughness in your athlete.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think one other thing that's coming up in me, Matt, as we're talking about this, is that for so many people, athletics is the place to process emotion. Like it
Oh,
is the place to metabolize stress. It is the place where you get to be yourself and like leave it all out there. You know, it can be incredibly fulfilling in that way. And so I don't want to take any of that away. Like that's absolutely a beautiful and incredible thing about it. And what if we could do that even more? Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, um, but it's also sometimes an escape for people, right? Like it's an
Hmm.
escape from um daily life, it's escape from trauma, it's escape from like difficult life circumstances. And I think that as coaches then that it becomes really important to know your players and the life circumstances that they're coming from. And if you can differentiate between, for this player, emotionally, intellectually, is athletics expression. Like, is it them being able to express and process, or is it escape, right?
Hmm.
And not judging that one is like they should be doing one or the other, but if you can identify the players who bring a ton of energy to their sport, right? Because they're escaping something else, those are the ones that you really need to focus on giving these practices and skills to. And it's probably going to be more of your players and athletes than you realize, right? Like,
Oh, yeah. I think it is, and it depends on the demographics of where you are, the
for sure.
situation you're in, all those things, and it's all. But and such a great point. But what it just made me realize is
Mhm.
we're spending all this time talking about the athlete, and I know that I've watched a lot of coaches that go through the entire game
In fight or flight.
in fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, it's
I
how they
don't think that.
I think it's how they think they're motivating their players or how they're engaged in
Yes.
the game, you know? And one other distinction that can be helpful for the coaches, if you look at Paul Gilbert's work on the emotional regulation systems, he kind of just
Hmm.
really simplifies stuff and breaks it down into, we're always responding either from our soothing system, our threat system, or our drive system. And I think what
Hmm.
coaches get confused a lot is the drive system and the threat system, because
Hmm.
they both include adrenaline and norepinephrine. And so embodied, that can feel really similar. Like that adrenaline rush that you experience in drive and in stress can feel really similar. And we can like amp up stress sometimes easier than we can connect to drive, particularly when we're tired. And so if you're already a tired coach who's like burning the candle at both ends, like which
Yeah.
probably are because you probably have another job on top of your coaching job and
Right.
everything
Right.
else, like then it's incredibly important for you to like engage in breath work or another vagal toning practice that can help you show up fully for your players
So
from
I
that
know
drive
that we
place.
lost people. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
that we lost people here when you talked about a vagal toning practice. I
I
know what you're
know,
talking about here, but let's
but it
talk to
sounds
give
weird,
me. Well,
doesn't it?
let's do this. No, it does. It does. It
Yeah.
sounds like somebody could have gone a different way, a different body part, but we're not going to get into that.
100%.
Um,
Yep.
so I want to go into talk to me about what the vagus nerve,
Yeah.
the importance of resetting that vagus nerve, and let's give an option. I would love if a coach could pull this out and be like, oh, I want to
Yep.
learn this, practice it, and practice with my players a vagus
Yeah, vagal
nerve
toning.
trick.
Yeah,
Lay one on
so
me.
excuse me. Okay, so vagal toning does sound like a reproductive organ, but that's not what it is. So,
It's not.
um, but like, so all of your nerves, just like all of your muscles, have different names, right? And the largest one in your parasympathetic nervous system, that one that we really want to be leading from when we're resting, digesting, because that's the place we can grow and heal and create from, right? Is called the vagus nerve, which means wandering. Vagus means wandering nerve. So this huge nerve wanders throughout our whole body and it touches nearly every vital organ. It doesn't really touch our adrenal glands, but it touches nearly everything else. And so it's the thing, our body sends our brain 10 more messages than our brain sends our body. So the vagus nerve is the thing that more often than not is a part of sending those messages to our brain, whether we're conscious of them or not. That's what's happening. Our body's sending brain 10 more messages than we're telling it what to do, right?
Right.
So if we can, with intention, tell our vagus nerve, what to do. Like, then regulating that vagus nerve so that's not always activating a stress response, regulating that vagus nerve is the most efficient way to regulate your entire nervous system, right? So if we
Okay.
focus on the vagus nerve, then we hit nearly everything, like a lot of other things, right? So some things you can also Google uh, how to tone my vagus nerve, and there'll be lots of different options that come up.
Hmm.
Things that do it that I think coaches would be interested in it. So, chanting or like, but you have to do it so it's activating your vocal cords so you can feel like the hum of your vocal cords in your chest.
Hmm.
So if you've got a team chant or a team cheer or something like that, that's going to activate your vagus nerve. People don't know that that's what's happening, but that's when people feel centered, right? Like after y'all come together and you've got your thing that you're hollering about, like hollering about, that's activating that like deep vibration in your chest. It's like you just centered your whole team all at once, right? Regulated them all at once. And if you can do that for, up to 30 seconds, that'd be super cool. Breath work does it like I would start with up to 2 minutes as you're practicing it. When you really need it, you won't even need to do it a full 2 minutes. My favorite breath work is called 478. I think it's really,
Hmm.
really good for athletes because it's a natural pain reducer and it takes down inflammation and it helps regulate emotion really quickly. So you can look that up too. It's just inhaling through your nose for 4, holding your breath for 7, exhaling through your mouth for 8. So going through 6 rounds of that with your team, like that's just how you start practice. Like,
Yeah.
because they're coming from
Uh,
something else. You know what I mean? It takes very
yes.
little time. It's going to take you less than 2 minutes to do 478 breathing, 6 rounds of it. And that will save you a ton of time in like player distraction, having to manage emotion or conflict, like lots of different things, other things that can come up in practice. So those are a couple things that you can do.
And
Also
and that's a
cold
couple.
exposure.
Yeah, yeah, the
Yeah.
whole Wim Hof method, all that stuff. It's
Yeah,
really good
which
stuff.
is
But yeah,
so funny, right?
yeah,
The cold exposure
yeah,
thing is so hip right now. Like
yeah,
business leaders, business coaches,
yeah,
athletes, coaches are like, cold showers every morning for this
yeah.
long. It'll totally benefit you. And for some reason, we're willing to like expose our skin to cold temperatures, but not willing to breathe for 2 minutes while we
Right,
drive over a
right,
bridge.
right. Well, because okay, you know how I feel about the tough mantra, right? Oh,
Yeah.
I do all this stuff. I do cold baths and cold showers because that helps me. I'm like, or you could just breathe a little and chant a little bit, and like that's kind of woo woo, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it is kind of funny that
I,
you have
it's
to be tough to jump into a cold shower, cold lake, I guess,
there's that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think what you said though, when you're talking about these, one of the big complaints I have with coaches, or what coaches complain about, is athletes come to their practice after having been at school all day
Right.
around teachers, schools, friends, you know, girlfriends, boyfriends, things like that, and they're just like everywhere.
Yeah.
Like their heads are everywhere, and coaches are also complaining about we don't have enough time to get done what we want to do. If you would start each practice with some breath work, toning that vagus nerve, like it resets it. There's so many benefits, right?
Right.
You're
Well,
you're you're practice. You're teaching them how to practice in breathing when they need it.
right.
It's resetting the nervous system.
Mhm.
It is not wasted time. It's a time saver.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, the benefits for them as whole human beings for the rest of their lives are not, I mean,
It
you can't even argue with it. But then the benefit to your team and to your athlete and to their performance in that sport is you can't argue with that either. I think one other
no.
thing that people get a little weird about is meditation. Um
Hmm.
and one thing that really helped me overcome that bump is someone described meditation to me once as just thinking about the same thing over and over and over and over again. And I was like, huh. And she said, so you're already meditating, but is it what you want to be thinking about
Yeah.
over and over and over and over
Yeah,
again?
you're
So
right.
I'm
It's
like,
intentional.
oh,
It's yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. And I know you've got another episode where you talk about neuroplasticity and the importance of mindset and like building those neural pathways. So I'd highly recommend that episode too. But that's
Yeah.
what we're doing when we're meditating. So if you want to trade out a different word for it, like
Whatever.
visualization, like lead your team through imagining how they'll work together, how they'll overcome whatever challenge, how they'll execute a play, how they'll win a game or a match or right, how they'll do that. That's meditating, right? Lead them through imagining the kind of person that they'll be as they do that, right? Well, will they be complete buttheads? Or will
Right.
they think about like how they'll respond? That kind of thing. So I think that meditation is another thing that coaches are constantly impacting and influencing without even recognizing it.
Yeah.
And if they can be intentional about um how they guide their athletes through like a meditative practice, that can also really increase performance and really help with all of this too.
And if you're listening to the, I'm gonna, I know you're still on here, and this isn't a commercial at this point, but if you're like, hey, you know what? If you're a coach and you're like, I like this, but I just don't know how to do that, then
Yeah.
that's why you call me,
Mhm.
or or
Yeah.
somebody else to do it, because they can give you tips, some ideas, start the process for you. It doesn't mean you have to have me on retainer at every practice to do it, but you got to learn some of these tools and you can start to do it. So
Yeah, I think that that's
it's
really helpful. Like if you have somebody that can come in, you as the coach, right? As the athletic coach can have somebody come in and just even assess and evaluate, hey, what are you doing already? Because you're probably doing more right than you think you are.
yes,
But what you're doing might just require minor tweaks to make it 10 times more effective.
yeah,
So you might be coaching the way you were coached or the way you read a book about coaching or the way, you know what I mean? Or
right.
you've watched the greats, right? And you want to be like them. And so you coach like them and you're putting all of these things in place. Um, and they might be okay, but you could make them really great with just a little bit of assessment and evaluation and then some minor tweaking. And I think that what people get, and at least the educators and coaches that I work with get intimidated by is like, that just feels like one more thing to do. And it feels like it's going to take so much time. And then I'm going to just be doing more and more. And it's actually not. It helps you work so much smarter and helps you save so
Hmm.
much time. That's what I would really encourage too is like, yeah, get Matt in there to assess and evaluate and create like a list of recommendations for you because it's not going to
Yeah.
be something that's like, oh, add another hour of practice time on so that you
No.
can meditate. No, it's something to integrate in to work smarter and be better.
Yeah, that and stacking drill after drill because we got to get better at that. Like, there's only so much that gets soaked up, right? And
Right.
that's anything, right?
Mhm.
It's so as I assumed would happen, we are really running out of time here.
Of course. Yes.
I know. So I want to ask, and I could continue this conversation another time. We could go several different ways on everything. Like I told you whenever I told you to come in, like we have to have a topic or we're gonna go
Oh yeah, we'll
everywhere.
go everywhere. We
Or
already
next
have
thing you know,
gotten
we're
kind
gonna
of
be we're
everywhere.
gonna be throwing thumbs up and getting the screen all messed up again like we
Right.
were. Uh, so what's any last thoughts as we close here?
Mm.
Anything we didn't catch that we should have?
I think maybe saying something I hope people caught, but in a different way, is that as I've worked with honestly some of the best people in the world around this research and practice and application, the initial feedback that I got around what to do with it was that we need to start introducing it to younger and younger and younger people. And that if we can maybe teach 5-year-olds about their
Mm.
brains and toning their vagus nerve and these practices, then how are we setting them up for success? And so that's really where I started, right? And it's where I
Yeah.
still do a lot of work. But what I've noticed is as I've developed tools and curriculums for adults to use with children and teenagers, is that if the adults don't do the work themselves, then we're missing it. Like, so a lot of my work has shifted in the last few years from developing curriculums and programs and practices for children to developing trainings for adults. Because if the adult isn't regulated, if the adult isn't moving, like
Yeah.
healing, if the adult isn't growing, the adult isn't dealing with their ego, toning, like, then it's going to be really, really difficult for children who most often learn by modeling behavior to trust you, period. And um and so if you don't have trust with the child, the adolescent, the teenager, then um there's a reason that you the reason that you don't. And maybe so all of that to say focus on yourself first. So as the coach, focus on yourself first. I know the initial like desire is
Yeah.
how can I provide something better for my students or my athletes or
Right.
my kids? But if you don't focus on doing this yourself first, number one, you're not going to understand how it works. Number two, you're not going to believe in it long term. So you won't have like the motivation and stamina to keep it up for anybody else. Number three, people aren't going to trust you. So when you
Yeah.
show up dysregulated to tell them how to be better, so I think
Yeah.
that's
Just do your breath work, like I said, right?
right.
That. Yeah, I know. I
Honestly,
got. Yeah.
it sounds funny, but that's how a lot of
Yes,
teachers, a lot of
I know.
leaders, even a lot of coaches show up and you're just like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah,
It's. I like to give the analogy of whenever it's never happened to me when I'm on a plane, but the stewardess or the flight attendant always says, "Put your mask on first, then
right,
take care of your kid."
right,
Like you have to take care of yourself first.
right,
You have to, and then help somebody else, but you have to model that behavior first, which is, I think
100%.
that's a really good analogy because it's breathing and it's all those. Yeah, I'm gonna have to figure that out. Now I got some stuff to think about, Megan. Um, Woo. Okay, awesome. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much
It's
for having
been a
me. It's
great
been fun.
conversation.
Yeah.
I hope my listeners stuck with me and don't think we're crazy, but we didn't make this stuff
Hey,
up. This is this
maybe
is this. Yeah.
maybe some will leave, but maybe you'll get some newbies,
There you
you
go.
know?
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. You never know. But no, I really appreciate you coming on, and maybe we'll find a different topic at a different time to have you on.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Matt.
Great. Mettle is a person's ability to face adversity in a spirited and resilient manner. It is a great skill to have for athletics and for life, but it is not something we are born with. If you want it, you have to forge your mettle. And if you listen to the Mental Mettle podcast, you already know that, but not everybody else does yet. So help me out by ordering and wearing some sweet The Mental Mettle podcast gear. We've got short sleeve tees, long sleeve tees, and some super comfortable hoodies. Order online today and you can have your gear in no time. But the best part is that every order helps support the show and helps me spread the message that mental toughness is a trait that can and should be built. So find the link in the show notes, order your gear, and start showing that you know how to forge your mettle. Athletics is controlled adversity. It's one of my favorite things I talk to people about is how athletics, it is adversity. Don't kid yourself if you think it isn't. It's adversity, especially for a young athlete. And when I say young, I'm talking about anybody who's not a full-on adult, really. Athletics is adversity. There's winners, there's losers, there's competition, there's struggle. It's all these things. And that's partly why we love it, right? And it's also partly why it's so useful, right? It is
such a great tool for kids to be involved in of any kind of athletics, any type of competition, because it gives them a way to face adversity. And you have to learn how to deal with adversity, because that's what life is. Life's a real adversity, right? So it's really good that athletics is adversity. It's great, but there's good and bad of that. It's good if you learn how to deal with the adversity right. Okay. You have to be able to learn how to deal with the adversity in order to learn how to deal with it correctly, so that you can deal with life's adversity when you get older, right? Find ways to, in pressure situations, to think calmly, right? And to process calmly and do things correctly. And that should be one of our main goals as coaches, as parents, to have kids, have athletes that process the adversity and deal with it right. That's what we call mental toughness, right? The ability to do that. I'm all about that mental toughness. The downside of athletics being adversity is if you don't learn how to deal with it correctly. If your response, or a kid's response to this adversity, is to constantly getting into that fight or flight, and when you lose a game or lose a starting spot, those things, and feel that same sort of angst and anger and not handling the stress and feeling discombobulated and can't figure out what to do next and all that. If you're constantly running around in that state, it's a problem, especially for a few reasons. One, it's not healthy in the moment. It has some long-term health effects. That's well known. As young as kids, if they are constantly in that fight or flight response, constantly facing adversity and not dealing with it correctly, it's shown to increase cancer, Alzheimer's, you name it, anything that's dealing with inflammation, which is a lot of things. And also, and part of the reason that it carries on so much is if young athlete or a young person at all sees all this adversity and trauma and never learns how to deal with it, that means that they continually deal with it incorrectly, or another way to say it is they don't deal with it, and they're running around in their entire life in that imbalance of how you should feel, and never calming down, and constantly being stressed, and constantly full of this cortisol and adrenaline and these hormones, and they're not metabolizing, and it causes stress in all these parts of the body. If that's how you deal with stress in life, it just keeps getting worse, all right, and becomes a bigger issue. So athletics is adversity. That's good if you learn how to deal with it. If it's really bad, if you don't, because it just makes things worse. And I love to put things in perspective. So parents, listen to this. You're talking about your athlete or your kid not dealing with stuff correctly, and be like, that's all right. They'll deal with it. They'll figure it out. You are literally, so let's say you got an athlete that's in high school and they're not handling things correctly, and you just let it go. They continue to not handle things correctly in college, and then they get married and they don't handle things well there. And then at some point, they're going to possibly have kids, and they are literally, parents are paying attention. You're literally setting your kids up to have your grandchildren born with short telomeres. And I know that sounds like I'm making some sort of joke, but it's real. Generational stress is real. It's documented. It's researched. You are starting kids off from birth not able to divide cells as well, which means they don't heal as well, means they have more inflammation. This stuff's documented. It's real. The sooner you can start to address some issues with your kids, the sooner they start to heal and less chance they're going to pass some of those genes on to their to your potential grandchildren. And I know that seems like I'm trying to scare you into like getting some coaching services, but so be it. I'm telling you, this stuff matters. And we're just starting in with the research of this stuff. The more they find, the more they realize that we have to be able to handle stress better. We have to handle adversity better. Athletics is a great place to learn how to do that, unless you don't, and then it's even worse. So I think our goal as parents and coaches is we need to learn how to model that behavior. We have to show that behavior if you want them to ever do it. It's like I mentioned in that interview, that oxygen mask drops. You've got to put yours on first. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to model that behavior, and you've got to teach yourself how to use some of these tools. You can talk to me if you want. You can talk to a coach. You can talk to a therapist. Or you can just go online, find some tools, there's all sorts of things you can get out there. Everybody's going to tell you what's best and what's, you should definitely do this or do this. There's so many ways that you can do it. It's hard to go wrong. If you're putting intentional time into some breath work, it's going to start making a difference, right? It's most important is the accountability. You say, I'm going to set a time that I'm going to work on some breath work and get better at it. And I'm going to keep practicing it. I'm going to let my kids, I'm going to see my athletes, let them see me doing it. And if you're a coach, start making it part of your practice plan. I've talked about this before. We talked about it when I interviewed Dave Feeney, and he works with a girls team and some of the coaches he's seen and stuff like that, how there's college programs now that start with breath work. It is a phenomenal way to get kids out of they've been on their phones. They've been in class. They've been doing all these things all day, and their minds are all over the place, right? A lot of them are going to come into you in that flooded state already, and then you're just going to try to dump on top of it, right? You have to give them some tools to be able to reset that vagus nerve, calm down, recenter, refocus, and then go. It is a time saver. This is so many things I wish I'd have known when I was coaching more, because I know I didn't do a lot of this right. And I think a lot of coaches don't do this because it's just not out there as accepted practice everywhere yet. And it's starting to become more common. But I think we need to up the ante a little bit and speed that process up, because we are talking about kids that are under more stress than ever. And if we don't deal with it and we just show up into practice and games and add more on it, we're just making it worse. It's no wonder, we get kids, we talk about them, how they're being soft and things. Well, we just keep dumping on them and not giving them any tools to deal with the stress. Because you can say what you want about kids being soft these days, but they grew up in a different world than we did. And they are facing a lot more stuff, a lot more. And a lot of it's, because they're in their phones, but I can't change that. I can't fix that. They exist. It exists. So we got to learn how to give them tools to do that. I think building it into your practice plan at the beginning is really good. I think once you've taught them how to do some breathing, I've taught some breathing techniques to athletes when they do get triggered in a game. Perhaps they make some mistakes. Everybody's yelling at them and they get taken out of a game, and they're just like, and by the way, Megan and I didn't talk about this, but it is one of the most ineffective times to talk to a kid about their mistakes is right after they made all these mistakes and they get pulled out of a game, because chances are they're flooded and they're full of all these hormones and all these things, and they're not thinking clearly. They're not processing what you're saying. They just aren't. And that's just biologic, right? And you can say they should need to listen and pay attention because they pick up, but it takes like 20 minutes for them to calm down. It can. So what's really important there, I think, if you get a kid that is flooded like that, coming off because of a real stressful situation, you can give them tools to do on the bench. I do several. That 4-7-8, look it up. Megan mentioned it. It's a really, really good one. Just 3 rounds of 4-7-8. Start to let them calm down. And then you could talk to them. Then you could get them back in there. Just depending on the situation. I wouldn't, but I'm just saying it is, I think, perfectly acceptable to give a kid a tool when they're coming out of a game and they're super stressed and can't process and making a lot of mistakes, give them a tool that it's okay to go sit on the bench, breathe a little bit, calm down and think a little bit and be ready to go. It's a great tool to do all this stuff. And if any of this stuff sounds interesting at all and you'd like to please shoot me an email, give me a call. I'd love to give you some ideas, some tips on how you could use it with your team. I work with teams. I work with coaches. I teach these tools. I coach coaches, athletic coaches, and the whole idea about helping yourself first. I work with coaches so they can understand these tools and then use them with their athletes. It's a great program. Great thing to do. If you ever are interested, Megan did not sell herself at all. I mentioned it quickly and she didn't talk about it. She's the owner of Lark Song, which is out of Marion, Indiana, and they do coaching, but then they also run a coaching certification program. If you have any interest in becoming a professional coach, that's the place to go. And please don't become a professional coach without getting some coach certification, because there's a big difference between people that just do it and people actually get certified. But if you're going to do it, I would say definitely I'll drop her email, or not her email. I'll drop her website in the show notes. Check it out. It was a life changer for me. That's the program I went through. It's what allowed me to become a coach, which I, love what I do now, but it was really a life-changing thing for me and made it me, and the ripple effects in my life and the people I affect it's too many to count. I love it. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I love to get away from the woo-woo of coaching and therapy that some people look at it and be like, I don't know. It seems kind of woo-woo and nonsense. It's real. There's real research. There's real reasons behind it. And there's real progress to be made using it. So I would highly suggest that you check out something, find a way to use it with your athletes, your kids, and you'll all be better for it. So until next time, this has been the Mental Mettle Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Matt Thomann, and remember to forge your metal. Thanks again for listening to the Mental Mettle Podcast, produced by Coraggio Media, sponsored by QuickCut, a video management platform for every level of play, and by Mental Mettle Coaching, helping athletes learn to face adversity in a spirited and resilient way. The Mental Mettle Podcast is created each week to help players develop more mental toughness, and that is something that will help all of us. So help me out and like and share the Mental Mettle Podcast with your friends. Until next time, keep forging your metal.